Good morning. Welcome to those watching this video later. We actually do have a fair number of people who watch this. I've talked to a number of folks who, if they miss one, they'll watch it. Or yeah, a few others who have watched the church service and heard us talking about it have been watching the studies. Thanks to those who are watching. And again, you're always welcome to send in comments, questions, things like that. And thanks to everybody here too for making this a really engaging conversation so far. We are going to start by trying to finally finish chapter 5. This is week number 3. There was a lot going on in that one. It got into the creationism debate, and that's, that generates a lot of conversation. It has for a long time. But we need to finish this chapter. So we're going to be on page 77. That last section is called A Lifting of the Burden. What we talked about last time was we went through the 3 ways that the young earth creation movement deals with some of the tensions that Job experienced. So we talked about experience versus tradition for Job. He realized that the tradition he had learned didn't match his own experiences, and he repented. It's like, I clearly didn't know. And young earth creation decides, you know what, we're just going to be selective. We're only going to pick and choose the things that fit. We kind of sidestep the things that don't fit. We all do that to an extent, but they're really a little easier to catch in it, I guess. The next one was us and them, how Job thought he was the top of the social pyramid and he helped those at the bottom, but then when he ended up at the bottom, folks kind of scorned him and avoided him. And in this one, it was the company that Ken Ham runs called the Answers Book for Kids, and it was the story about why do bees sting. Oh, it's all your fault. it's humanity's fault for sinning, and Paul Wallace said, well, that really puts humanity at the center, and that doesn't fit what Job went through, that it's humanity is part of creation. And then
that doesn't fit with science either.
Right. We're part of this bigger interconnected creation. Then the third one was, Job's model and conception of God. Well, God must be like me, right? Takes care of the disputes, settles justice, and helps the poor. And that's not how he felt. And so here was an angry God, sentimental, nice God who loves everybody, but then, one toe out of line. If you don't believe like we believe, God's going to get you. Like that was kind of the he even said, there's a part on their website that just says God is angry with us. Why? For suppressing the truth of a literal 6-day creation. Well, he said that this is on page 77, the end of that section. He said, I have a dear friend who is a creationist, and she has evidence enough that taking a 6-day stance on creation does not always lead to the weird stuff that, the young earth creationists do. Categorical rejection of the cosmos on one hand, the rigid and sentimental young earth God on the other. He said, perhaps Ham and company just follow young earth logic further than others care to. So then we have the last section. It's called Lifting the Burden. Ham and company are not the only ones who have felt the exacting eye of God upon them. What are human beings that you make so much of them, that you set your mind on them, visit them every morning, test them every moment? Will you not look away from me, let alone until I swallow my spittle, you watcher of humanity? That's what Job says early on in chapter 7 of Job. This is long before the whirlwind shows up. God kind of puts Job in his place. It says, thus does Job riff ironically on Psalm 8:4, which is something we talked about the first week. Who are we that you have set us a little lower than the angels? That Psalm says. Job, though, is lamenting the burden of having God's incessant attention. The Lord dogged Job's every thought and move in Job's time. It seems to me that anyone who believed God was reading her thoughts, waiting for her to fall outside the boundaries of strict six-day creationism, or any equally narrow doctrine, would get tired also. She might follow Job's example and give God a piece of her mind, but she might not. The watcher of humanity has set the rules and they are plain. It is for her only to obey and be watched. Where else would God look? In this extreme anthropocentric view, the eye of God has nowhere else to be but right down on us, for the remainder of the cosmos is margin. There's a famous sermon from this early 1700s or late 1600s called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. It's written by one of the Puritan colonies, Rhode Island or Massachusetts, right there. Sinners in the hands of an angry God. And the whole thing is about how, if God just got tired of you and would remove the one, his hand protecting you would just fall into the flames. You better shut up. Fire and brimstone. But it's that same kind of scrutiny, right? God's always watching.
If you kind of think of God as watching over you and understanding some of your thoughts, it's kind of easy to think of God as being angry and judgmental, because my thoughts aren't pure,
Right.
and for God to know all those thoughts, it's kind of scary.
To say that God knows our hearts is scary.
Yes.
Other parts of scripture say God knew you before you were born, knows every hair on your head. That's a little more, I think, comforting, like, oh, I'm so deeply known and loved by God. So that's what he's saying. Like, on the one hand, God loves everybody deeply and cares about you, but get one toe out of line, brother, you're zap, right? It's this, how do these two things work?
I'm gonna want to see this as somewhat schizophrenic.
No, you're not. That's what he's saying too. It's like that was the third section. Is that God is like us and an artist and an architect and involved and loves creation and you're a beloved child of God. But at the same time, step one foot out of line and God is angry with you. It's like how do you do this? How do you live with that?
And then you bundle what we think we know about science into that, it really makes it complicated.
Right.
Totally complicated. And if you stop and think about it, man's only been in history about 1/10 of the time,
If that.
probably less than that.
Yeah.
So
here's another one. So let's say evolutionary psychology teaches us that human beings are not by nature. Yes, we live in society, but by nature we're going to be us first, right? We need to survive, whatever it takes to survive. If evolution teaches us that whoever has the best adaptations makes it, then I've said jokingly, darkly before that all those lawsuits that started with the coffee cup and McDonald's, like, well, now there's warning labels on the lawnmower that says don't set this on your lap while it's on. Like I feel like the legal system is defeating natural selection, right?
yeah.
That's a little bleak, right? Shouldn't people learn from their mistakes? If somebody else did something dumb, litigate and award the money.
It's me on TV. Medication says don't take this medication if you're allergic to it.
Right?
That's legalese about that.
Because you might not know you're allergic to it.
That's right, but if you get sick, we'll be told not to take it.
Right? So there's that part, but then there's this whole thread and tradition in the New Testament that Paul especially talks about and others of Christ in us, or we put on Christ, right? So there's all that dualism that Paul talks about the body or the spirit, flesh or the spirit, right? If we just are left to our own devices, then we're going to kind of do this evolution thing. It's not bad, it just is, right? I'm not trying to pit them against each other, but when we put on Christ, we can go beyond what we could do just by ourselves, right? We can go beyond only doing the sin we don't want to do, but we can actually love our neighbors as ourselves with the help of God, with the Spirit's guidance, with Christ in us. There's this theological teaching called sanctification, where we become more holy with the Spirit's guidance. We can never get 100%. Some denominations say that there's some chance that maybe you could progressively get better. But
That's
I take it as a graph in math where there's a limit, right, where the line keeps maybe getting closer and closer as we mature in faith, but you'll never actually hit that threshold.
if you hit it, then you're God.
Right, and so there's some
That's-
separation.
That's,
That's what got even Adam in trouble, right? Thinking you could be like that. So,
but you know, there is something said about, I was watching a program about Black Plague that went through London.
Yeah.
And it killed 50% of the people.
yeah,
1 out of every 2 was killed. But the other half that wasn't, never got sick, so they had an immunity to it. So there is a selection in that. So it's hard for me to connect the two together, I guess, because on one hand, nature is selective. I mean, and there's been other things like that. This is like people from the COVID, a lot of them died from the COVID, others didn't. So there is a lot of selectivity there, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
there's an acronym. WIGIAT. Where is God in all this? So, where is God in natural selection?
Well, see, that's why I have a
Where
problem.
is God in,
People talk about that God knows everything, and He's with you every minute of the day.
right?
I don't. My way, I don't believe that.
I have a relative who just did a Facebook post today, that was, all it said was, everything happens for a reason. That was the whole post. I'm not sure what you're talking about, first of all, but I have a hard time with that too. I think, I will tweet that, I think that God can work everything towards good. I think God can take even natural selection, even sin, even tragedy, and work through it with the people involved and try to turn them towards God, turn the situation towards good, bring in the helpers, teach people compassion. I can be comfortable with that. This is my
But
being
that's not the
selective,
same thing as saying that God knows everything you could do
right?
ahead of time and that He's watching you every second of the day.
Yeah.
I do not.
So that's my mental
Concur.
gymnastics that I do, just like the young earth creationists do with some of the science stuff. I do that in terms of how do I deal with these things that don't make sense to me. So I don't have an explanation for why viruses kill some people and not others. Why would God allow that? Where is God in all of this?
I think this,
Well, everybody's going to die,
Right,
so I mean, the ones that die first might get to heaven first, and might be advanced.
sure,
So,
sure.
so why it's not necessarily bad that those
Right.
people die.
It's hard for the people left.
Yeah, you know, you take the high road, I'll take the low road.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm not opposed to that. At the same time, I wouldn't go to a funeral and say that to somebody who's grieving. Right, so,
well, there's someone tries to answer that problem.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
I'm more comfortable with this than most people.
but that's the thing, like, that's what I was trying to say last week. Everybody does something in terms of picking and choosing. Like, the young earth creationists are easy to hold up and say, wow, these folks, boy, they're a piece of work, because it's very easy to say, well, you're ignoring this thing about plate tectonics and continental drift. That means the moon would have been like in our backyard, right? It's easy to take the science and be like, well, these people are dumb. But all of us do. I mean, I was just doing it now. Like, I have a hard time with the conception of the God who is puppeteering or micromanaging or I don't, that doesn't track with my experience.
Well, it said right here that He likes the stupid animal or the insect as much as He likes us.
Right.
So if you stop and think that,
Mhm.
then you're not the center of the universe anymore.
Yeah. And then maybe you don't put all of the sin of the world on ourselves. And maybe at the same time, the tragedy is still gonna hurt. The bee is still gonna, it's like the, what is it? When the dog bites, when the bee stings from Sound of Music.
Yes.
The bad things are still going to happen. But if you're not the center of the story, then you don't have to try to assign meaning to everything that happens. Oh, God did this to me. Everything happens for a reason. So I have to figure out what that reason was. Well, the reason must be that I did something. Right? There's this whole train of thought. So if you decenter yourself,
Put your ego in your pocket.
yeah. And that goes both ways. It brings you down, but it also brings the rest of creation up. It's maybe this is part of the Isaiah thing that we have last week and this week. Mountains brought low, the valley brought up, the rough ways made smooth, the crooked paths made straight. Maybe this is part of it, is that maybe we're not the center. Maybe we level the playing field for everybody in terms of justice, that, the poor are fed. But maybe this is also a matter of decentering ourselves so that not everything's about us, for good or for. We can't take all the credit, but we also don't take all.
Being a bit, I held a burden,
Yeah,
think that I had supposed to have control over this, I'm not.
Right.
It just,
if only we hadn't sinned, if only we could get our act
Yeah.
together, then the bees wouldn't sting us anymore. That was the example. Or, that's a lot. And some people would just be like, yeah, whatever, or they'll live with it and go about their lives, but for other people, like this author, like Job, you really take it to heart. Then you beat yourself up. There's a lot of Christians who are just miserable. Some just leave the church because what they've heard and internalized for most of their lives, it's not everybody, but for a lot of folks that I've talked to or read accounts of, they just were like, I can't carry this. I need to walk. Let's look at page 78. Down at the bottom here. He told the story of him submitting an article or something. And he got the letter that said, thanks for your submission, but no thanks. And he said, for a single second, the sun was burning down on him. He said, for a single second, it became a great eye, full of attention and fair of judgment. You have failed. That was a lie. And it did not come from God, it came from me. God is not watching us, waiting for us to fail or to sin or to check off the right belief boxes, whether those boxes say 6-day creation or whatever. To think otherwise is to carry a terrible burden. This is a big theological claim right here. A lot of people would disagree with this. A lot of people would say, no, God is watching. Maybe God isn't waiting for us to sin to smite us, but maybe God is waiting to guide us, right? This is a big theological statement. But what he's saying is, God isn't watching us in order to punish us. God isn't waiting. There's a Far Side cartoon, I've shared this before, of there's a computer screen, and there's a guy walking under, the classic cartoon setup where there's a piano on a rope being lifted up, and there's a guy walking under it, and it says, God at the keyboard, and God's got his finger over the button that says smite, right? That's funny, but I can't believe that's how God is operating. And that's what he's saying here. To think otherwise is to carry a terrible burden. I mean, it'd be like, I had a friend in elementary school, and I went over to his house this one time to hang out, to play, and out of nowhere, his mom comes in. She's livid. She is laying into him. She went through his backpack and found a paper with a seal. He didn't tell her. I mean,
they were shocked, me.
I got the impression as time went on that this was what he lived with all the time. He had to be perfect in sports. He had to be perfect in grades. His parents were always watching, just waiting for him to slip up. When they went to the basketball game, they weren't the ones going, yay! They were the ones going, you did that wrong. Imagine that
Literally.
from God, right? When we did soccer in California, the league had a policy that said, coaches coach, parents cheer. If the parents started to cheer, they'd get asked to leave, or the team could get penalized. If you started yelling out what to do to the kids, or if you started yelling at the refs, or anything like that.
I think some of them around here. Yeah, I've heard it.
Because it's a rec league, right? It's supposed to be for fun, to teach you teamwork and how to learn the game and get exercise.
So cheering is bad.
No, parents are supposed to cheer.
No,
The parents shouldn't be
don't-
coaching or criticizing from the side.
Yeah, don't be the coach.
Don't be, it's,
Don't be the coach.
Coaches coach, parents cheer. Parents should just cheer and have fun.
it's hard for people to understand. They're just a cog in the whole mechanism. They're not the operator. Just a cog. You're not an operator.
Yeah.
In the whole machine.
Yeah.
You could have a multi-billion-dollar airplane and you have a $5 part break, you lose the whole thing.
That's right.
So you're just part of the whole system, just a cog in the whole system. Without you, it doesn't run, but with you, but you're not the one that's,
And
you're not the one that's controlling it.
a lot of Eastern cultures, a lot of African cultures, Native American cultures have a better sense of this. We're all, hey, no more coffee. We're all in this together. We're all interdependent. But a lot of Western culture has the whole you know, be the hero, right? And do, you know, there's a musical called How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, like climb your way to the top, do whatever it takes, right? There's this whole like individual more over the collective. And you know, that's what we live in. So there's a lot of folks who subscribe to that way of thinking that, you know, it's all about me.
In teaching, I'm sure Johnny seen it too. So many parents, they would put so much pressure on their kids and it's like, you know, I think that they were all trying to get them into Harvard and Yale at third grade, you know, and you just back off, you know.
A lot of people in jail for that right now.
Yeah, or you got it right, because they were falsifying stuff,
Yeah.
or the same thing with the sports. We gotta get them on the right travel team now in third grade, so that they'll be on this team by the time they're in middle school or high school, and then the scouts will see them, and then they can get scholarships, and like,
9 out of 10 of them are not gonna get a scholarship
or
anyway.
even if they do, they're not gonna make it to the pros. So just, so that, okay, you all know this, that's what he's describing, you know this through working with parents, through working with just in life. What the burden could be to have that kind of pressure and scrutiny on all the time. And for a lot of Christians, that is the model of God that they are taught and that they have internalized. That God is just waiting for us. He said, the good news of Job is that that burden may be put. And then he tells another story about going to the Museum of Natural History, Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington with his wife. They went to this, and they saw all his favorites, you know, the dinosaurs and the fossils. But then they went into this room that had a, what is it? Nature's Best Photography.
Yeah.
And he said, we walked in and were blown away. We just stepped through hundreds of millions of years of natural history and now stood eyeball to eyeball with nature as it stands today. Dalmatian pelicans, proboscis monkeys, southern pig-tailed macaque, the camel thorn trees. Where are the those? But he said, you know, such a, he talks about the thing we talked about before. How many species have gone extinct already that we've never even seen? So that could be overwhelming. Bottom of 79 here. Such a view is challenging because we like to think, even when it hurts us, that things are pretty much about us. I don't mean us as individuals, but us collectively as human beings. We are the ones made in God's image, so aren't we pretty important? God was incarnated in a human being, not a trilobite or a macaque. Isn't that suggestive of some kind of favorable rank order? Job suggests not. God is with us, you and me. God knows us. God takes joy in us. But God also takes joy in reviving parched landscapes human beings will never see. God takes joy in each and every one of those oddball creatures that came and went long before we showed up. The ones who lurched through primordial swamps and flitted through Triassic skies and slithered silently across floors of oceans that no longer exist. God so often speaks to us through things that have nothing to do with us. One of the lessons of the Gospels is that if we want to see Jesus, we should look to the margins of human society. So that's one thing I've been waiting for, is to get to Jesus, right? This very much is focusing on Job. Jesus isn't part of Job. Jesus isn't part of the Old Testament in the same way. But how does this apply to us as Christians, right? So this is the first step in that, the first link in that chain. One of the lessons of the Gospels is that if we want to see Jesus, we should look to the margins of human society, to the hungry, the imprisoned, the naked, the weak. Similarly, one of the lessons of the cosmos is that if we want to glimpse God, we should look to the margins of creation. That's what God showed Job. The remote, the impossibly tiny, the strange, the alien, and inhuman. So at the museum, I stood for a while in front of a picture of white-headed langurs. I maybe can share the link in the comments of the YouTube page so if folks want to look up these pictures, they can. My mind relaxed, my breath became regular, and I remembered with gratitude these words of Andrew Harvey: we are saved in the end by the things that ignore us. So, question for everybody. Think of Matthew 11. So there's this line at the bottom of page 78, the good news of Job is that that burden of that scrutiny God, that burden may be put down. So Matthew 11 has the famous passage that says, "Come to me, all you who are heavy laden, and put my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy, my burden is light." Doesn't say that you'll not have a burden, because we're supposed to bear a cross. But to those, could this be a part of our proclamation? It's not necessarily a good thing to share the good news by saying who we aren't, right? Lutherans are really good at that. Well, through our history, like, well, we're not like those Roman Catholics, or we're not like those Baptists, right? Lutherans are really good at defining ourselves by who we aren't. Helpful to understand the differences, but not so helpful in terms of sharing the gospel of grace, right? Not like those people. It's a mixed message. But maybe part of our proclamation could be, if you've been hurt by a theology, by a church that has taught you that God is like this, lay that burden down. Do you know anybody? I guess this is my question. Do you know anybody outside of church who isn't coming to class or worship that maybe could hear those words? This is not the God that I would share with you. Know anybody who's carrying this burden of an angry, waiting to smite you God?
Not anymore, you can see, you got most of the people.
Most of the people I know that don't go to church are just lazy.
That maybe there's something under that. I will take Luther's eighth commandment explanation and say, let's interpret other people's actions in the best possible
They
way.
have lots of excuses for
Yeah,
why.
sure,
they just- Yeah,
Yeah, made lots of excuses, but maybe there's something underneath the excuses. That why church does not appeal to them. If there's something that,
well, that's,
if there's something that they associate with church, this is what church is about. That would paint God in some other kind of light.
So many times, when you're out in the world, even when I guess the little time I was really out in the world was when I had a job working. And really not supposed to talk about religion.
That is true.
So it's very hard to get into a conversation like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not exposed to a lot of people. Down in the dumps,
Yeah.
and exposed to stuff that I'm not.
Maybe it comes out in the protests of, Satanist church is gonna put up a statue, right, just to mess with people. Maybe it comes out in, we're gonna put up a Festivus pole in the state capitol. This is a real story. Festivus is a made-up holiday from Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And so like, oh, we have the right to celebrate our holiday, so they put up a Festivus pole in the state capitol.
that was what I was about to say. I think part of the problem is that religion's got watered down. And the reason I say that, my old boss, he's gone now, he died at 68 years of age, which is probably kind of funny, but just a year ago. But because he was so young, but he, when he was younger, he saw something on the internet where if he paid $25, they would ordain him into this religion.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So he could then, so he says, I can just marry people because I'm now a minister. So what I'm getting at is,
Yeah.
religion's been watered down to the point where it's irrelevant.
It's a novelty.
Yeah,
Well, and some folks have responded to church teachings that just don't seem to work for whatever reason, by just watering it down, saying, whatever, that's all a joke. Others have doubled down and saying, oh no, God's gonna get you, because you're all sinners, like, both extremes are.
I think I've shared it before, but it's been quite a few years ago, but I had a mother who came to me. She couldn't, they had moved here from West Virginia, and their child had been in private school. And when she got here, back then, there weren't that many private schools around, and they were full, it's the middle of the year. And she came to me 2 or 3 months after having a child in my class and confessed that she had been afraid to put her child in public school because she told me that we were all atheists and we would preach just on and on and on.
Oh.
And she said, you've changed my mind. She said, you're a Christian person and you're a teacher.
Yeah.
And I wasn't flowing in the classroom. We're not allowed to do
Right,
that.
exactly. That's the part that always gets me, like, no, we need to put the commandments up in there.
But some of these people, they think if you don't just zero in on their beliefs,
Right,
that you are, bad people.
Now, I had a nut when I was switching from Catholic to public, said I was gonna go to hell for Going to a public school.
Oh, she told you that?
Yeah,
All right.
and I thought, why not the council, if I stop being Catholic.
That's what's the problem with, when you have church when you have church and state mixed together. I'm somewhat, I'm a Lutheran, okay, so I don't want somebody that's another religion teaching my kids
Right.
religion.
Right.
Because it goes against what I believe, so I think they should be separated.
Yeah,
But you can also show your Christianity by how you act.
exactly. Yeah, because that's something that got left out too, is it's not just that everybody else needs to teach your kids for you. If you think it's important enough for them to learn your particular belief system, whatever religion that might be, then you teach them in your home.
Not the school.
You bring them to the church or the whatever that you want them to learn this stuff in. You don't require this public schools to do it.
No,
If it's important enough for you that you want them to learn it, then do it, teach it.
I don't know, was there a time when they had prayer in public schools?
Oh, yeah.
Because I had parents who, oh, well, you know, why don't you pray? I said, well, should I do a Jewish prayer or a Muslim
Right,
prayer or,
right.
you know? But in Hanover, I don't know if they still do it or not, they called it a moment of silence.
right.
Did Enrico have, where,
Covers everything.
and you didn't have to pray, you could, you know, and teachers weren't allowed, you know, we didn't tell our kids they had to pray.
Yeah.
I'd say, this is your moment to think about your day, or if you wanna say a prayer, if you just wanna think about your family, you know, this is your time.
Now, there was a whole lot of stuff that happened after World War II and into the Cold War, like, in the Pledge of Allegiance, the phrase under God was added
Right.
then.
Yep.
Because, well, can't be like those, heathen communists. Like, we gotta show that we're a Christian nation. So a lot of the stuff we did in the public schools was in reaction to other things.
I think
It's not like we always had prayer in school. It's not like we
We
always had.
never had prayer in school.
Yeah, I never.
Well,
had that.
No.
My mother went to a country school.
Yeah.
Okay, and the teacher and all the other kids in the class were Catholic except for my mother and her brother.
Yeah.
So they had one of two things. They said the rosary every morning.
Mhm.
So she could either sit and listen to the rosary or stand in the cloak closet. So there was no heat in the cloak closet, so they'd sit there. Now, my grandfather was part of the school board, and my mother came home one time reciting the rosary.
Uh-huh.
And my grandfather went through the ceiling on that one.
Yeah.
That was not done anymore after he got to the school board.
So many examples of this. I think this is always been my issue with creationists. If you want to believe that in a literal 6-day creation, that's fine. But that it turns into a debate, that it turns into a crusade, that if you don't think the way we think, you're bankrupting the moral value of the whole country. I have a hard time. Like, if you don't agree with all the teachings of natural selection and evolution, have that conversation with your family. Learn what the school is teaching, but then move on, right? You don't have to, like, if there's a religious thing like Jehovah's Witnesses who aren't allowed to do anything related to holidays or anything related to the pledge, that's different. But
They're not supposed to, but the little girl I had, you could give her a holiday picture, her mother said as long as she didn't, like Christmas, she could color the wreath and everything, but she couldn't make it Christmas colors. She had to have like a blue wreath or a.
Sure.
right?
It was strange.
Any other thoughts on that chapter that we've spent now 2.5 sessions on? It was a very good chapter and it brought everything. We're not gonna make it to the next one, but we can get a start.
My kid brother prays for me all the time.
Okay,
Well, that's good.
yeah,
It's sort of sarcastic.
He thinks you're down the wrong path.
Hey,
you might not agree with the content of the prayers, but you can appreciate that he
Yes.
cares about you enough to do it, right?
you know,
There you go.
he thinks my way of thinking, he prays for me all the time.
Yeah, and I bet you could do the same for him in the other direction. All right, chapter 6, it's called The Darkness of God. So, let's start on page 81. We have the two extremes that he's describing. You have on the one hand atheism, and I don't just mean like agnostic or not for me things, but like sort of that militant side of atheism, like if you believe in God, you're dumb. And on the flip side, the really militant, there's a creation movement that says if you don't believe in God or if you believe in evolution, you're going to hell, like, so these two extremes. So let me set this up. So a few years ago, Oxford biologist and noted atheist Richard Dawkins sat down with then Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and had a nice chat about science, human origins, and God. Williams is open to science, so there was agreement between them on issues such as the importance of scientific literacy, the wondrous beauty of the cosmos, and the fact, that religious people cannot afford to turn their backs on evolution and other successful scientific theories. But an essential difference surfaced at the end. At issue was the origin of the cosmos and the possibility put forward by some physicists that it arose out of nothing and has evolved on its own ever since. With this idea in mind, so there's two key factors: evolved out of nothing, and Christians would say God created out of nothing. Okay, but then evolved on its own ever since. Christians would usually say no, God's been involved. With this idea in mind, Dawkins, the atheist, said to Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, "What I can't understand is why you can't see that this is such a staggering, elegant, beautiful thing, why you would want to clutter it up with something so messy as a God." Williams agreed with the elegance bit, but added, "I think you put your finger on one of the things that does seriously divide us. I'm not talking about God as an extra that you can shoehorn into this. That's just not how I see it." To which Dawkins replied emphatically, "That is exactly how I see it." So the difference here being that God is an extra, that why, science and evolution, it all explains and it all holds together. Why add God? And the Christian response being, not adding God. God is inherently a part of it from the beginning. Plenty of Christians see it this way too. Okay, that's the surprising part. It's not just the atheists who feel that way. Take Albert Mohler, for example, president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and a young earth creationist at the time this was written. He believes that religion and science are in a necessarily competitive relationship, writing that evolution represents one of the greatest challenges to Christian faith and faithfulness in our times. Because, well, I'll just keep reading. Their agreement may be due to their shared assumption that whether or not God exists, God properly plays the role of an idea among ideas. Right? So you can't have God and science because they're in competition.
That's what the book that I was reading tries to answer that question.
Right.
And God is in science.
Right. And that science is a part of creation, therefore part of God. Like it's not.
I think that can be answered by the fact of the laws of physics.
Yeah.
I mean, you listen to most atheists or creationists, a lot of that the cosmos was built out of chaos and just happened to end up the way it did out of serendipitously got lucky, right? Well, when you put the laws of physics involved, everything changes. I mean, there is evolution all the time. Things evolve, but the laws of nature and the laws of physics never change. They're always the same.
Yeah,
The basic premise. We might learn more about it, the laws, as we get more educated, but the basic premise has not changed since day one. And that tells me that there's something divine involved.
Yeah, that level of constancy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That those, just that matter alone, says that that's not chaotic. They are legit and they haven't changed.
Yeah, and so some folks can't handle it being together. So he's saying from the creationist side, God is capable of being displaced by scientific investigation. Well, that right there is like a lack of faith, isn't it? Right? God is capable of being displaced by scientific investigation and necessarily jostles with science within a single conceptual space, like opposing chessmen on a finite grid, right? So if science is of the devil, evolution is of the devil, it's temptation, it's leading us away from God, it has to be one or the other, it can't have to be. Their disagreement lies only in the fraction of that space on the chessboard occupied by each competitor. Mohler's science to God ratio is the inverse of Dawkins's, just as his theism is an inversion of Dawkins's atheism. Their contrast is evident and their game is possible because of and not despite their shared assumption that it's either one, right? That God versus science, right? Both Dawkins and Muller are excellent communicators and have spent years expressing their views with clarity and vigor. He says he admires them for how they go about this. Bottom of 82. But conceptual precision is no substitute for openness to the world. So often the cost of clarity is narrowed vision. Yeah, I can see everything now because I'm only looking at the part I want. Both Dawkins and Muller have had to divide the world in order to conquer it. This division makes things simple for both men. I don't think it's unfair to say that for Dawkins, science is good and religion is bad, or that for Muller, the Bible is right and science is wrong. The integrity of both views depends on not taking seriously those features of reality that fall outside these artificially constructed boundaries. You know? And now think of Job. He had his very nice, neat, orderly world and view of the world, how God works, and God goes, right? Like, we're gonna zoom out and pan out. I'm gonna blow your mind and force you to see that it's not just this little bit that you're comfortable with.
I think where people run it, when that statement, I have a hard time with that statement that we were made in the image of God. I have an issue. That's where part of this problem comes from, is they think they're better than the rest of humanity, or the rest of creation, I guess. So that term bothers me. It always has.
I mean, and that is a teaching that has evolved for me over the years. At first, I took it pretty literally, like, oh, on some level, human beings look like God. But the farther I go, the more I think, well, if God is, as Christians confess, Trinity, 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, that's eternal relationship. That's the aspect, one of the aspects I think of. If we're created in the image of God, then we also are built for relationship. If God cares about justice for the marginalized, and we see from Job cosmologically too, then we should, therefore, if we're created in the image of God, we should also care for the least of these, like Jesus says. But that I have zoomed out in terms of what image of God means. Because otherwise, yeah, well, I'm created in the image of God. And then if you think, well, only the people who think like me are the most image of God, then it's easy to be like, well, you guys are less than, right? To start writing. Dehumanize. The integrity of both Dawkins and Muller flatten and artlessly shortchange the world. In order to be open to the world, we must take even our best ideas about science and God lightly. This is because we just don't know, right? This applies especially to ideas about God because, unlike the objects of science, God cannot be confined by any space, conceptual or otherwise. The Archbishop is right. God is in no way an extra. God is not an addition to anything. This kind of talk makes some people, especially those like Dawkins and Muller, seem to have little tolerance for ambiguity, which drives them crazy. Admirably labeled theological doohickey postmodern BS by one of his online readers, it is anathema. It is contrary to, what is right, to common sense types, both atheist and religious, because it suggests that we live in a state of ignorance about God. This is the crux of this chapter. So it's called the darkness of God. There's parts of God that we cannot and will never see. We see through a glass dimly now, but on that day of resurrection of the end, then we'll see clearly and we will see face to face, right? So right now we can't. But if you tell that to somebody who says, I have all the answers through science, or somebody who says, I have all the answers through religion, if you say to either side of this, no, actually we live in a state of ignorance about something. Oh no, we don't, right? Nothing is more offensive to the modern mind than the idea of any kind of permanent, in principle, ignorance. Okay. Over a bunch of notes here. sometimes we have these beliefs that we know these things, but we have it kind of subconsciously. We don't think we know these things. We don't think we think these things until something pushes back. We might not even be able to put it into words. Well, why is this making me feel uncomfortable? Whatever it happens to be. Something somewhere in there is pushing up against something you think you know. Any thoughts, questions on that introduction that we're going to get into our ignorance of the darkness of God?
One of these countries do not how can they avoid? I don't know how to answer that question. It just amazes me that the whole country can be separate.
Well, that in itself is a kind of religion, right? That our way of thinking, our system is the only system you need. Put your trust in that. Let's do one more section. Unknowing the baseball. So he's talking about his introduction to physics class. Says the students walk in, they bring something with them that physics teachers call physical intuition. In most cases, it's a set of unspoken, unconscious assumptions about the way things work, built up over years of living as a physical being and a physical. Because you walk and run and climb stairs and drive cars, you do all these things, and just because something works doesn't mean it's true. Physical intuition often conflicts with the laws of physics. And the example he gives is about baseball. He tells a story about, Braves and Mets game, somebody hits a home run. Says the ball was in contact with Freddie Freeman's bat, no longer than 2 milliseconds. It was moving in excess of 100 miles per hour when it lost its contact with the bat and began its long high arc into the stands. Here's the question he asks the class. Once the ball left Freeman's bat, what kept it going? What exactly is it that pushed the ball through the air along its path? Wasn't the bat, it's not touching anything. What force was responsible to keep the ball in motion once it was air? Most students will say, oh, the air gave it a push. He's like, no, it's air resistance. Oh, gravity. Oh, the gravity is going to change the trajectory as it goes, but the gravity's not the thing pushing it. And so none of them, most of the students don't quit it. It just keeps going, right? How does it keep going? Well, we know maybe about Newton's laws, right? And an object in motion tends to stay in motion. That initial force was all that did it, and it'll just keep going until something makes it stop, like gravity.
Change direction.
Right. I gave it a little extra oomph. That's a scientific term. He said, same thing with a hockey puck. It'll just keep sliding. The ice has very little surface or resistance, so that puck will just keep sliding as long as the ice is smooth, until the air and that little bit of friction on the ice slows it down. He says this foray into sports, and this is bottom of 84. This foray into sports and physics is not about sports or physics. It's about misconceptions. Pre-physics 101 people tend to think that wherever there is motion, there must be a push or pull making it happen, but that's not so. And it's a simple misconception, but he says it's hard to shake. He has a footnote here. It's the same thing about, well, how could the Earth go around the sun? There's nothing pushing the Earth, right? That was part of the arguments against it. Some of my strongest students carry vestiges of this into their second semester in view. Here's the crux, top of 85. The problem is, as long as these vestiges remain, a reliable conceptual foundation can't be laid. So one of my big jobs as a teacher is deconstruction. We went through this in seminary too. The wrong ideas need to be taken apart and carted off so that the right ones can be built in their place. This notion of deconstruction is very important for our purposes, and we will often use variants of the word unknowing, not like the lion crept up on its unknowing victims, but like deconstructing your knowledge, what you think you know. So unknowing. Such deconstruction, unknowing, is especially challenging from a teaching point of view because more often than not, Students' misconceptions about motion are not consciously held. They do not know that they do not know. They must be shown this. That is, in order to move forward, they must come face to face with their ignorance. I think I told the story a few weeks ago. A guy in our class in seminary, we were talking about the Gospels and how the prophecies, maybe this was a different study, but how the prophecies in the Old Testament weren't originally, at least in terms of the people giving them, about Jesus. They were for the people in exile, they were for the people of Israel. And then later on, Christians could look back and say, oh, this is also about the coming Messiah, right? But this guy stood up in the middle of class and challenged our expert biblical Greek teacher that he didn't know what he was talking about. You need to go back to your and read your Bible, and I will pray for you. Got heated. He was having being confronted with something. The teacher was trying to deconstruct some things that maybe we just held unconsciously,
And he fought back.
and then build them back up again. And yeah, he fought back because it was challenging him to think what was under it, right? So like we were saying before, what are they lazy? Do they have excuses, or is there a reason they don't come to church? What was the reason underneath this confrontation? Well, if that didn't mean Jesus the whole time, then does that throw into question the other parts of the Bible? Does this completely blow up how I understand the Bible works? I really feel like that's where he was coming from. Now, he didn't come back after that semester, and he started a blog that rips the ELCA on a weekly basis that he still keeps going today, 20 years later.
Well, that's why my brother is very literal.
Yeah.
He's a creationist from the get-go. Sure. And I always thought to myself, someday, somewhere along the line, he's gonna be confronted with something he won't be able to answer. And his religion is gonna fold up like a house of cards. How do they, I guess I'm not sure how he adjusts to that.
I think that's why there's so much strict rules and control and very black and white teaching in a lot of literal denominations that take the Bible. This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And I'm fine with most of that, but there is gray in this world. Like even 10 commandments, right? Don't murder people. What if you're defending yourself? What if someone breaks into your home? What if it's a war? What if it's suicide? Like, what breaks the commandment when you start looking at the black and white? It gets complicated, and that's not a bad thing. But that can be a difficult thing. You understand? It's not bad, like inherently wrong, but
I'm always curious how he justifies
yeah.
situations.
I think you build a world where this is it. Anything that falls outside of this is just wrong. And oh, that challenges me, then I must have to make the change. Right? It's not just Missouri Synod, it's a lot of far right Christians, not far right politically, but far right.
Yeah.
Literal biblical literalism and six-day creation and that type of.
I guess they do it the way Ham does it. He said, well, dinosaurs were there, they were on the ark. Right. And I guess unicorn missed the boat. So
Yeah.
That's how they must justify it. I have a hard time with
So
justification.
that's a question I skipped over on a previous page was, well, isn't it just much easier to do it the way the young earth creationists do it? There's a lot less aggravation, right? A lot less stress. Like, okay, God loves me unless I mess up, then God's angry. So I'll try not to make God angry. The earth was created in 6 days. Now I don't have to worry about evolution. I don't have to worry about, dinosaur fossils. This is just how it is. Like there's a lot. But on the flip side, if we say, to these folks, come, like I said just a minute ago, come lay your burden at Jesus's feet. You don't have to live with this just angry unit of God all the time. Is that just cheap grace? Right? Is that swinging the pendulum too far? We're not the center of the story, but God won't be angry with you. It'll be fine. Do what you want. You'll be forgiven. That you don't want to swing too far. So, here we are having a debate around a table and splitting hairs and stuff. It's a lot simpler to just be like, this is right and this is teach me the right things and help me avoid the wrong things.
I see just the opposite. I think Well, thinking that you are just a cog in the machinery.
Yeah.
And you're an important cog.
Yeah.
But that's what you are in the whole machine, and without you, it's not gonna run right, or will run right if you lose something else. But it isn't all, you're not one in control of this machine, you're just a part of it.
Yeah.
It don't work without it, like I said, you can have an airplane that's worth $5 billion, you
Yeah.
have a $5 part and the thing's gone. So you're important in the machinery, but you're not what's running the machine.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, a lot less burdenous than thinking that I gotta do everything right and the thing falls apart.
Yeah. I mean, you're a beloved cog,
Yeah,
right? That, not everybody wants to be a cog. They wanna be the engine, the whole.
yeah, to me, that's much more of a burden than.
But I think you yourself know that you're not like everybody. I think you're the first to say that,
Yeah.
and,
I've been told I got issues.
We're all unique.
yes, we are.
I said one time, I said, I bet I could be the doctoral thesis for somebody.
But that's it, but here's the thing, you have conversations with people, right? And you and Lois are not the same, and I love that you have each brought different things to this conversation over the last few weeks. And each of the folks that have been at this table have brought different stories and experiences. And to me, sort of what you're saying, I'd rather have that messiness, right? Of conversation and maybe our experiences don't line up, but we can rub off on one another, we can learn from each other. Overall, it gives us a bigger picture of who God is. It'll always be incomplete. That's where I'm coming from. But other folks need or have a desire for more structure, keep it strict, no messiness, right? We can't have messiness. God doesn't like messiness. God took the messiness away and made order out of creation, right? So it all kind of holds together on that. So I don't fault anybody like Ken Ham for trying to have understanding and a system and to say, I don't like messy. I want to understand and I want God to be the way I like to be. And, things are in their place.
Did you know he was Australian?
I think I did know that.
I just read, I get a magazine I signed up for was there, and he was actually came to this country, I can't remember what it was, but he was born and raised in Australia.
So I get where he's coming from and wanting to build these museums and these monuments to saying God is in control. God has a plan. God has order. Because like Job, if order free, if disorder and messiness and chaos is threatening, it's scary, then your idea of God is going to be somebody who puts everything in order to say, do not be afraid, I'm going to take that scariness away. But Job had an idea of God. Each of us has an idea of God, and none of us gets the whole picture, and that's scary.
God is in control, but not to that, but not.
Yeah.
To the level or the way that they think, other than most people think, I guess, other shape,
But a lot of people.
but he's in control, but not to the extent that he said, that he knows everything every minute, second, and controls every second.
Or just God's definition of control is different.
Yeah.
So, we'll pause there and we're gonna stop knowing that we are ignorant, and that's okay. And we're going to move from here to next week where we celebrate Christ coming into this messy world. And not into a palace, not into what do you call it, labor and delivery floor, with a,
I thought we were on happy service next week.
oh, sorry, in our worship next week, we'll move into the story of Christ, not in class.
So.
But we'll get the story.
Oh, 2 weeks?
2 weeks, yeah, we'll be back on January, I think 6th or 7th, whatever that first one is. But yeah, next week, we won't have class, but we'll hear the story of God entering this messy world of ours. In a stable, and not in the inn, with smells and animals and all of that. So God's gotta be having some comfort level with the messy, to even become human in the first place. As human beings are messy. And we're gonna come back, and we'll finish chapter 6 when we come back. And what we're going to get into are mystics, a branch of Christianity called mysticism or mystics, who have these otherworldly encounters with God. And also the thought of something called purgation. So purging away either what you think you know, deconstructing and building back up. And that's what happens for Job, and that's what I think it's safe to say that God desires that for us, each of us, is to deconstruct the stuff we think we know and the harmful things and be open to what God's trying to tell us, which is probably not what we think we need to know. Yeah.
One of the things, I didn't have a religious upbringing,
Right.
so I didn't have any preconceived concepts. So most of my religion, or my faith, I should say, is what I perceive in cosmos, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So I didn't have any preconceived concepts of
Mhm.
what Christianity was.
Just
My
negative
folks-
ones.
So basically, mine, instead of being educational, mine is more perceived from.
Yeah.
Factual.
Well, there's this thing, it's, I forget the name, it's something quadrilateral. It's the four sides of how we like take stuff in, and it's like reason, experience, tradition, and scripture. Again, for people of faith, scripture, reason, tradition, and experience. So all four of those pieces, you know, we have different proportions of each depending on how we're wired and experience and our, you know, our background, but all of us turns to those. We turn to scripture, we turn to the tradition of the church around the scripture and the teachings that we've gotten over the years, usually denominationally. Our own reason, what can we figure out, and then our experiences, what have we actually lived through? All of that informs how we come to decisions and how we live this world. And that's why we have to have these conversations, not just because the body of Christ has arms and eyes and ears and feet and elbows, but also because each of us has a different set that we bring to the table. All right, so live in your ignorance for a couple of weeks. We'll be back.
Thank you.